Eddie, Kelly, thank y'all for coming and being here for another session of counseling. And so today we're going to deal with conflict. So tell me of a time, of a story, or maybe something you're dealing with right now, or something that you have dealt with that causes conflict to arise within your marriage.
Well, I'll go ahead and speak. We have a hard time agreeing on where to spend special occasions. So recently we got in a huge argument or conflict. It was a discussion about where to spend our Easter holiday.
Okay.
I think Kelly and I, we both are blessed with both of our parents still being alive, and they live nearby, and we have great relationships with all of them. So naturally we both want to spend time with our own parents, and so it just sort of we have to sort of juggle how much time do we spend with her parents, how much time do we spend with my parents, and sometimes that gets a little tricky for us. We get stuck sometimes.
Okay. How do y'all normally go about solving that conflict? Or do you? Do you feel it gets solved, or do you compromise, or?
I think we eventually come to a pretty good decision that ends up working well for us. I think unfortunately though for us, sometimes it takes numerous conversations and dialogues that aren't always the healthiest before we get there.
Well, and I like to keep, unfortunately, a tally of how long we spend one place and not the other, and vice versa. So we like to see which way does it fall, who sees more of which parent, I guess.
So you have a tendency to keep score.
I keep score, yes.
Okay. Okay. If in that kind of conflict, or any conflict that arises within your marriage, how would you, Eddie, we'll start with you, how would you define completely resolved? What would completely resolved look like to you?
I would say completely resolved of this kind of scenario would be when we have a plan and we both have a clear understanding of what that plan is, and we both fully support it, and we've, I guess, reconciled to where we've asked for forgiveness, and I feel like I've been forgiven. That we're on the same page. I know that's a cliche, but as long as we're on the same page together, then I feel like things are whole. Things have been healed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Kelly?
I guess I could probably echo what he said, and maybe I feel like he has understood where I'm coming from by verbally telling me he understands me, and vice versa. We have good dialogue about it.
But if we could just get there quicker,
yes, that would be good.
That would be better.
Understand. Okay. So y'all both agree if y'all could get there quicker without conflict, the better.
Right. I agree. I think that's a good point. And this does tend to be a chronic situation for us, and it has gotten better through the years, and that's really good. I just like to put this issue to bed once and for all, and yeah.
Okay. When it comes to conflict, some people have used unfair weapons when it comes to conflict. Kelly, in a situation of conflict, what would be some unfair weapons in your opinion that Eddie could use, or may have a tendency to use? What are some unfair weapons?
Well, sometimes we like to point out the negative parts of each of our parents, and maybe Eddie will point out something that might have happened in the past that I feel like is a negative thing because it doesn't help us move forward.
Okay.
Kind of thing.
Okay. Are there any other unfair weapons that he could maybe use or might use?
Well, really, I guess it's more of he likes to use things that, like I've said, have happened, or he might, I don't know, that's kind of a hard thing.
I can bail you out here.
Okay, thank you.
This is one thing that I do have a tendency to do, and Kelly calls me on it quite often.
I always, you always.
Right, I say always. You always are that never happens. So I use big words like never and always and same old thing, things like that. You know, a large blanket over a statement, and that seems to escalate things.
And then I want to know exactly what he's talking about. So if I want to know the number of times I've done it. Because if
Okay.
I've always done it.
And so then when he uses the term always, now you're not even dealing with the actual conflict. You're dealing with how
Other
many
things.
times and other things. So now so that might be another reason why you're not getting to a solution quicker, because now you're not even dealing with the problem.
That's true.
Because we're dealing with things in the past
Right.
at that point, and
Right.
that I think promotes more energy and more antagonism.
Mhm.
You know, when you bring up the past like that.
Okay.
So
Eddie, what are some unfair weapons that Kelly might use during conflict or during this scenario with going to parents? And
well, unfair. I would say one thing that I interpret as being a weapon, maybe others wouldn't interpret it this way, would be sometimes when we are having these maybe multiple conversations, we're not getting anywhere, we're stuck, we can't seem to solve the situation, she can just become really, really quiet and just sort of shut down and doesn't want to process anymore. And so to me, that she has all the control when she just chooses to be quiet and doesn't want to go forward with it. I feel like that's a weapon, and I feel like that can then hamper many other parts of our household. So that's a weapon. Silence.
okay.
Well, I do that because I'm trying to process everything you're saying, or tune you out sometimes. I can see that.
I understand.
Yeah.
So there are times that you do use it to cause harm to the situation rather than you really processing it.
True.
Okay.
I can see that.
Okay. So when you use, Eddie, when you use unfair weapons with Kelly, and Kelly, when you use unfair weapons, that probably more than likely is going to just stir up anger in the relationship and in the conflict, because you're not dealing with the conflict now you're dealing with other things, and so you're not resolving it and getting to a solution. Usually anger, when anger begins happening in the marriage, it comes from either hurt, either one of you becomes hurt, frustrated, or fear in the relationship. And so when it comes to anger, what effect does that have upon resolving conflict? What effect does anger have upon resolving conflict?
Well, it doesn't really help the situation at all. If anything, it escalates it and causes us to even lose sight of what we started arguing about in the first place.
Okay. What other effects might it have?
I think it brings the process, if you will, I think it brings it to a halt, really. Sort of stops it, at least for us.
Right.
Yeah, it definitely slows it down, if not stops it altogether.
Is there ever times in the anger when you are feeling angry that there's words that you may not normally use with each other, yelling, any of that, those kind of ramifications from anger?
Yeah, we can yell a few things that we normally probably wouldn't have said. One of the things that we have to work on is not doing that in front of other family members, meaning our children. So we try really hard not to let it escalate like that, but it does at times.
I think what I do sometimes, I mean, I do my fair share of raising my voice, unfortunately. But sometimes I can talk under my breath more than I get loud. And that, I guess it helps me to get it out, but, you know, it's certainly not fair to Kelly for me to do it that way.
And I can roll my eyes like nobody's business.
Okay.
Facial expressions.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
So some
true.
nonverbal things sometimes tend to maybe cause more or escalate the situation even more sometimes.
Right.
Okay. All right. I've given you both of you, verses out of Proverbs in dealing with anger and the right way to deal with anger in marriage or with conflict in your marriage. Kelly, if you would read your verse and then explain what you feel that verse is saying about how to deal with anger.
This is in Proverbs 14, verse 29. A patient man has great understanding, but a quick-tempered man displays folly. So basically, when we become quick-tempered, we're displaying foolishness and not really doing what we're supposed to be doing. And if I would just hold my tongue, or we would both hold our tongues and listen, we would have understanding in our situation or our conflict.
Okay, great. And Eddie, what about yours?
Sure. The verse I'm going to read is Proverbs 16, verse 32. It says, "Better a patient man than a warrior, a man who controls his temper than one who takes a city." So I think there what it's telling me is it's more important for me to be a man or a husband or a father that's willing to be patient than to be the strongest of men that can take control over any situation. Maybe when in times of conflict, when my anger arises, I get into more of a warrior kind of mode. But I hear the Bible's, I think, pretty specifically telling me that it's better to, be slow to anger, be patient. Certainly if I'm going to be patient with anybody, I think I would want to be patient with my wife. So that's a good reminder, good verse.
Okay. When it comes to conflict, the only person that you can control in conflict is yourself. Eddie, you can't control Kelly, and Kelly, you can't control Eddie. So learning to control yourself when conflict arises by not muttering under your breath and rolling your eyes and saying things that you may not normally mean to say or saying always. And so when it comes to controlling yourself, Eddie, I'll start with you. How do you normally, when conflict arises, how do you normally respond to conflict? What's your mode of operation?
I think typically I like to try to talk it out, process it as soon as I can. I'm really deep down. I'm a person that really cherishes and values peace and harmony. I don't feel comfortable with conflict. Certainly, I think it depends on where the conflict or who the conflict is coming from. That determines how anxious or how upset I get within a given situation. But I think I'm typically desire a solution sooner than later.
Okay.
Yeah. So I want to talk it out, basically.
Okay, and you want to deal with it as quickly as you possibly can.
Right.
Okay. Kelly, based on how Eddie deals with conflict, how does that make you feel sometimes?
Sometimes I need a chance to express myself, whereas he's trying to process it more on his own terms. And so that can cause me to be irrational. And one of the things that I loved at the beginning of when we were dating was his peacemaker. He was able to be a peacemaker, but I can use that as a kind of a weapon at times, because I think I'm going to be stubborn and I'm not going to give and I'm not going to give in, even though he's trying to be the resolver. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. All right. And so you, when he wants to deal with it quickly, you could sometimes use that against him.
Yes.
And
I need to be more understanding of where he's coming from, I guess, and a better listener, and to hold my tongue when I need to hold my tongue.
okay. And how does it make you feel that he wants to deal with it quickly when you want some time?
Sometimes I get impatient with that, but most of the time I appreciate that about him. I might not verbalize it, but I do appreciate that he's willing to resolve it faster than I am when I stop and sit back and look at it.
Has there ever been conflict that has arisen because he wants to deal with it quickly?
Mm. Yes, because I think some battles are bigger than others.
Okay. And Eddie, what do you think about that? Some battles are bigger than others. Are you one that wants to resolve everything real quickly, or can you sometimes process this really isn't as big of a conflict? And
I understand what you're saying there. I understand what Kelly's saying. I think in the actual moment of when that's actually happening, maybe I don't discern that like I should. You know, maybe I don't handle that prioritizing the conflict very well.
Okay.
But I see the validity of that point.
Okay. And do you see the validity sometimes of maybe giving her time to process before you jump right into resolving the conflict?
Yes, I see that as being a legitimate way for her to handle conflict, yes.
Okay. Okay. Kelly, how do you normally, when conflict arises, how do you normally handle the situation or deal with how do you respond to conflict?
A lot of times emotionally, depending on what it is. Some things are more emotionally charged than others. And as we were talking about earlier about our families, I can get very emotional about, if we talk about our parents, I take it very personal. And so that can cause emotion. But then there's other times where I tend to retreat and just ignore what he's trying to talk to me about. So.
Okay. And Eddie, how does that make you feel?
Well, specifically when I feel as though she is retreating, yeah, that bothers me because I think I feel so strongly with wanting to solve things quickly and let's get to peace as quick as we can, that when she retreats, it feels like she doesn't value, you know, quote, the good side of that of me, like, you know, she doesn't value that I love her so much or that I want peace. You know, sometimes I feel like she can sit with the conflict longer than I can,
Right.
And when I want to just get it over with, and she retreats, I'm like,
Well, and for
that's
me,
frustrating to me.
I can see that, but for me, I like to write down all of my emotions. So a lot of times if I retreat, he might get a note or an email about everything that I am feeling, because I get nervous sometimes trying to express, or maybe I think I'm not going to express it right and he won't get it. So I have to write it down or even email him sometimes after a conflict of different things that I'm really truly thinking.
Okay.
He doesn't like that.
I'm not a fan of that.
And why are you not a fan
Because
of that?
I'd rather talk it out in person than
Okay.
read a whole page of words about it. It's more personal to me if we talk it out versus reading an email. I'd rather our quality conversation come face to face, not through an email.
Okay. Well, when it comes to resolving conflict, I want to give you some homework this week. Okay. Some things to work through and to process together, so that when we meet next week, we can discuss this some more. First of all, instead of demanding to be heard, listen carefully to the other person. Take time to listen, and even make sure you're aware of the nonverbal cues, and make sure you're listening actively with maintaining eye contact, not muttering under your breath, not rolling your eyes, making sure that each person is heard in the conflict. Also, y'all brought up with your children, sometimes dealing with conflict around them, make sure you select or determine an appropriate time for you to deal with conflict so that it's not around your children. And sometimes I think it is okay to give her some time to take time to process it, but select an appropriate time to come back and deal with that conflict. I think it's also important to define the problem, because y'all have or you talked about how you begin dealing with all these other issues that you don't ever really resolve the conflict and deal with it because you're dealing with everything else. So define the problem first, and then in that define the areas of agreement and disagreement in the conflict. What do you agree upon, and then what do you disagree upon, and then that might help the conversation go in the right direction rather than emotion and we got to get this solved immediately. And so you might stay on track there. And then accept responsibility. Accept what you've done and accept what you've done, and ask for forgiveness. And then lastly, make sure that you forgive one another so that you can be completely resolved and enjoy your time at your parents' house, whichever ones you choose. Okay. Any questions that y'all have about resolving conflict?
No.
No,
Eddie?
this has been helpful. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank y'all. Well, we'll meet next week at the same time, and I appreciate y'all coming and being here.
Thank you.